The silence after Davis sprinted towards the enemy was excruciating. Henley was the first to break it, a choked "No!" barely audible over the dying crackle of the flames. We watched, numb. As he reached them, his movements were frantic, desperate. Not an escape, but a mission. I think we all knew before the first detonation echoed across the clearing. Davis understood. The whole damn team understood the calculus of this war in a heartbeat. Our position? Untenable. The enemy closing in, relentless, inhuman. The silence after Davis's mad dash was worse than the inferno that had consumed our extraction point. It was a silence filled with the unspoken knowledge of his sacrifice, a gaping hole in our team's rhythm. Henley, usually stoic, choked back a sob. Lee stared at his mangled communicator, a mirror of our shattered hopes. Davis, our joker, our demolitions expert, was gone. The second detonation that ripped through the air was his eulogy, a booming testament to his courage. Shame burned in my gut. As captain, I should have ordered him back. But in that split second, seeing the relentless tide of those things pouring out of the wreckage, I knew retreat was impossible. Davis knew it too. He'd seen the enemy in all their horrifying glory, their twisted forms barely human, their eyes glowing with a malevolent intelligence. Ramirez, his voice raw with emotion, confirmed my worst fears. Multiple hostiles approaching, Captain. Unidentified life forms, heavier than human, biosignatures, off the charts. We were surrounded by nightmare creatures, their guttural growls echoing through the smoke-choked clearing. The chopper, a sleek gunship unlike any we'd seen before, hovered precariously above the fray, its powerful engines kicking up dust and debris. Was it ours? Were they here to pull us out or finish us off? Doubt gnawed at my resolve. "Incoming bird, unknown affiliation," I barked into the comms, my voice hoarse. "Prepare for defensive action. Ramirez, can you ID the markings?" His reply was grim. "Negative, Cap. Can't see through the smoke and debris." "Lee, patch us into that gunship, now." The static crackled for an agonizing moment before a gruff voice filled our ears. "Spec Ops Team Delta 5, this is Hammer 1. Identify yourselves." "Captain Mendoza, Ghost Team 1, under heavy fire, requesting immediate extraction." There was a beat of silence, then a gruff chuckle. "Thought so. We saw the fireworks from orbit. Hold tight, Ghost 1. We're coming in hot." Relief washed over me, warm and welcome despite the tightening vice of the approaching horde. But amidst the elation, the memory of Davis lingered, a heavy weight on my chest. We were saved, yes, but at a terrible cost. We fought back to back, clearing a landing zone through the twisted bodies of the alien attackers. Reaching the clearing, we were met by a wall of black armor and grim faces. The soldiers of Delta 5 moved with unpracticed efficiency, shoving us towards the open side door of the chopper. A large hand clamped on my shoulder, squeezing it once in silent understanding. "We got you, Captain," the soldier said, his voice a low growl. "Now get on board." We scrambled into the chopper, the roar of the engines drowning out the sounds of battle. As the gunship lifted off, I took one last look at the desolate landscape below. The smoke from the fires mingled with the dust kicked up by the chopper's blades, creating a swirling vortex that seemed to swallow the remains of our fallen comrade. Davis was gone, but his sacrifice wouldn't be forgotten. We were alive, thanks to him, and we would carry that responsibility, that heavy weight, into whatever battles lay ahead. The days following our extraction were a blur of forced routine and hollow rituals. Medical checks bled into tactical debriefs. Tactical debriefs dissolved into restless attempts at sleep. Each step, each procedure was designed to restore order. But all it did was highlight the gaping void left by Davis's absence. Henley, usually a bastion of gruff stoicism, found solace in obsessive cleaning of his weapon, as though the endless disassembly and reassembly could somehow bring back a fallen comrade. Lee became a ghost, eyes haunted, fingers always twitching toward the useless remains of his comm gear. Even Ramirez, the sniper with nerves of steel, flinched at sudden noises, his scope forever searching for shadows that weren't there. And me? I found my refuge in motion, running drills till my muscles screamed for mercy, seeking exhaustion as a shield against memory. But at night, when the base grew quiet and my body finally demanded rest, his face would flicker in the darkness. Davis, with his easy grin and bad jokes, always the first to volunteer for the dangerous, the impossible. The morning the psychological debrief was scheduled, a lead weight settled in my stomach. The room they'd assigned wasn't the sterile interrogation chamber of the tactical debrief. Soft chairs, filtered light, the illusion of comfort. I recognized the tactic, had even used variations of it myself when breaking down civilians back during my intel days. But now, it felt like a violation, a mockery of the raw wounds we carried. The psychologist was a woman, Major Ellis. Her voice was soothing, her questions deceptively mundane. How are you sleeping? Eating? Any unusual nightmares? Henley offered terse, one-word answers. Lee just stared at the wall. When she turned to me, something in my own eyes must have betrayed me because her gentle facade momentarily cracked. Captain Mendoza, she began, her voice low. I understand this is a difficult process. Survivor's guilt is a common and entirely natural reaction to traumatic situations like the one you endured. Survivor's guilt. The phrase hung in the air, an ugly, accurate truth. It wasn't just that we'd lived while Davis hadn't. It was the gnawing knowledge that his death was our lifeline. Had he not sacrificed himself, the whole team likely would have perished. Logic dictated it, a sound tactical decision. But the heart was a far less rational organ. Ellis spoke of coping mechanisms, of grief processing, of the importance of sharing the burden. Good, well-intentioned advice, all of it. But inside, I felt the burden morphing into something else. Anger, at the unknown enemy that had unleashed this nightmare upon us. Determination, a desperate need to not just survive, but avenge. Perhaps Ellis sensed the shift, for her next question took an unexpected turn. Captain, I understand Corporal Davis was under your command. Can you talk a bit about your professional relationship? There it was, the unspoken question that had lingered since our return. Was Davis's sacrifice a failure of leadership on my part? I met her gaze unflinchingly. Davis was a damn fine soldier, I said, the words raspy in my throat. Brave, skilled, loyal. He understood the stakes the moment he saw those things. His choice. It was heroic. It felt wrong to call it a choice when the alternative was unthinkable, but Ellis seemed satisfied. Perhaps she saw the tightness in my jaw, the haunted look that no amount of soothing words could erase. She moved on. The rest of the debrief a haze of questions and half-hearted responses. As we filed out of the room, Henley caught my eye. He gave a jerky nod, a silent acknowledgement of the shared pain we couldn't put into words. It was a thin thread of connection, but in that moment, it felt like the only lifeline that mattered. Because, despite the procedures, the protocols, and the well-meaning attempts at healing, one truth echoed louder than all the rest. We'd left a piece of ourselves out there on that desolate battlefield, and no debriefing on Earth could bring it back. Morning came, not with sunlight, but the cold glare of fluorescent lights in a windowless conference room. A man with Major's insignia and an expression as sharp as his uniform sat at the head of the table. Operations briefing. His clipped words sliced through any remaining haze of exhaustion. Captain Mendoza, if you'd be so kind as to recap the mission. I launched into the standard recitation. Objective, intelligence, insertion, compromise. Every word tasted stale, like an afterthought compared to the monstrous reality we'd faced. I detailed Davis's actions, keeping my voice meticulously neutral. The Major's only reaction was a curt nod. It chilled me more than any monstrous scream ever could. He dissected our decisions with surgical precision. Our failure to secure the landing zone, the lack of adequate reconnaissance on the enemy's capabilities. Every word was technically correct, every criticism valid as far as standard operations went. But none of it touched the heart of the matter. Those things were not soldiers out there. They weren't insurgents or rogue state experiments. They were something else entirely. What can you tell me about the unidentified hostiles? The question came not from the Major, but from a quiet woman seated beside him. Intelligence, her badge proclaimed. Ramirez leaned forward, his sniper's eyes narrowed. Fast, unnaturally so. Coordinated, but not like trained soldiers. More like... He hesitated. More like a pack. Lee shifted in his seat. Biological readings were off the scale, ma'am. Elevated metabolism, some kind of regenerative capability. We took some down, but they just kept coming. The intelligence officer scribbled in her notebook, her expression unreadable. And their appearance? Any distinguishing characteristics? My mind flashed to those glowing eyes, the twisted limbs that were too long, too fast. Talking felt strangely reckless, like exposing a wound to the air. But these people needed to know, needed to understand the threat. Not human, I said, my voice rough. Some kind of bioengineered hybrid. Enhanced strength, speed, hard to kill, and that wasn't the worst of it. The memory of their malevolent cunning, the way they'd hunted us, made my skin crawl. The Major finally spoke. This goes far above your clearance level, team. Your primary concern was extraction, which you failed to achieve. The word stung. Failed. After Davis. Henley's knuckles whitened on the tabletop, but I clamped a hand on his shoulder before he could explode. With all respect, Major, there's more to this mission than a failed op, I said, my voice tight. Those creatures, they weren't just some unexpected variable. Understanding them is imperative. The woman met my gaze, a flicker of something like understanding in her own, but it was the Major who replied, his voice brooking no argument. Your part in this is over, Captain. Now, unless you have anything tactically significant to add, you are dismissed. As we left, the intelligence officer caught my eye and gave a subtle nod. Whether in sympathy or as a signal, I couldn't be sure. But the chilling truth echoed in the empty conference room. We were far from done with this fight.